I'm really flopping on explaining myself with these books. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new, welcome. My name is Bree, also known as the Sunlit Witch here on YouTube and a plethora of other platforms here and there on the internet. Thanks so much for stopping by. Today, I wanted to bring and kind of kickstart this new series that I'll be doing on my channel, where every month I will be doing like a what I read this month kind of wrap up. And I didn't want to kickstart that without acknowledging all of the books that I read in 2020. I read a lot of books in 2020, too many for me to talk about all of them in this video, or the video would just be way too long. So instead, I'm going to be talking about my very, very favorite books of 2020 and my not so favorite books of 2020. Just a quick disclaimer that me not liking a book doesn't mean you're not allowed to like it, and me liking a book doesn't mean that you have to like it either. It's just a personal opinion, and you know, I firmly believe that reviews of all sorts are beneficial. Some books just don't do it for me, and I'm gonna let you know if I think it's a waste of your money. Also, a lot of the books on this list aren't necessarily releases of 2020, but they're just books that I finally was able to pick up in 2020. I also want to provide a very quick disclaimer that if you are in the BookTube community and you are wandering and perusing through BookTube, I just want to do a quick disclaimer that the majority of the books I'll be talking about in today's video are of the occult/witchcraft nature. If you're not into that subject, then I don't think this video is for you. I also want to make a very quick disclaimer that if you are an author of a book that I may have read, this video isn't for you. Reviews are for consumers. I do not want somebody's hurt feelings in my comments because I did not like your book. I'm really sorry, but it apparently must be said. For those who do not necessarily want to watch my book review videos, I will be posting more detailed reviews every Saturday of what I have read in 2021 over on Goodreads. So please check that out. Go follow me over there if you're interested in reading my more detailed reviews. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the video. I want to start on a positive note, and I'm going to start with my very favorite books of 2020. Keep in mind that not all of these books were released this year. They're just books that I finally read this year. So the very first book that I want to talk about today is Modern Witch by Devin Hunter. This book is fantastic. I would highly recommend this book to any beginner and even maybe intermediates, because it's just honestly so chock full of helpful spells, and it's such a pleasure to flip through, even if you just want a picture book. It's so much more valuable than a picture book, but it's that pleasing to look at. Easy to read, easy to digest. It's so good it's so simple and calm. There's something I love being able to like kind of feel the energy an author put into their work while they were writing it and while they were putting it together. And there's just something very special about Modern Witch that makes it feel so inviting and inclusive and thoughtful and mindful, and it's really just so fantastic. The first two chapters are kind of like basic information, your need to know 101 type of stuff. And then the rest of the book is split into different types of spells and different types of magic. So we've got love magic, healing, protection, prosperity, and divination, which are all of your basics. If I had to recommend a book to a beginner that was released this year, it would 100% be Modern Witch by Devin Hunter. It's just an overall fantastic book, and the amount of effort that went into creating it is obviously just... There is no other book like this, and so it had to go on my favorites list. The next book on my list of favorites is Intuitive Witchcraft by Astrea Taylor. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but she acknowledges that, you know, basics are basics, and there's only so many ways like somebody can tell you the same information for a beginner. But she does say, you know, there's always kind of something new you can learn from every person. And in this book, I totally agree. There's something about the way she like takes her time explaining things and the metaphors that she uses. in kind of the exercises that she gives you, that I really do think this is an excellent book, not only for beginners, but also for intermediates. Even if it's just to, I don't think this is going to like superpower magic boost your witchcraft or anything. I don't know if there's a book that can do that. Basically, I think this is a valuable piece of a collection, and I think that it's very versatile. I'm a sucker for a book with lots of exercises. This has plenty of them. Like there are 3 sections, and it's kind of like beginner, intermediate. I would call it intermediate. She doesn't, but and then like literally advanced magic. So it's very much a book that you can grow with, and I would recommend that you grow with it slowly and not just like devour this all in one sitting. It's not hard to read, but it is a lot to absorb if you are absorbing it thoughtfully, if that makes sense. It could benefit just about anybody's craft. I think that we could have used like another word other than intuitive. That's my only complaint about it, and I don't know how to even justify or explain that complaint, so pretend I didn't say that. But yeah, next up is actually a book on a subject that I am still learning about. I do not incorporate this tradition into my practice at all. I just simply wanted to become a little bit more aware and considerate of other cultures and learn a little bit more about them, and so I wanted to read more about them, even if I'm not really intending on adopting other people's cultures into my own practice, if that makes any sense. And the book that I read was Sticks, Stones, Roots, and Bones by Stephanie Rose Bird. If you don't own a book by Stephanie Rose Bird, I highly recommend that you change that. This book is such a delight to read. It's so inviting and warm and welcoming and is to the point and straightforward. There's just something very special about the way Stephanie Rose Bird writes her books. She goes over lots and lots of basics. She goes over the bag, the broom, cleaning rituals, harvesting, protection, prosperity, fertility, sacred rites, all kinds of stuff in here, and all of it is just so digestible and so accessible. And I think that's one of the key words for Stephanie Rose Bird, is she really does. You can tell her intention is to make things accessible and to make things not scary. I do revisit it every now and then. I have been thinking a lot about the actual origins of certain traditions that we kind of often just assume originated from like European witchcraft. And you know, just a reminder that a lot of stuff we do nowadays actually originated not from people of European descent. So just a reminder. Next up on my list is actually an author who I have read a lot, and their work is kind of hit or miss for me, but this book was a big old hit. I stumbled upon it just on accident at Barnes & Noble, and that is Spellcrafting by Arin Murphy-Hiscock. You probably know her as the author who wrote like The House Witch, The Green Witch, the Witch's Book of Self-Care, I think is what it's called. I have all 3 of those books. I don't love all of them. This book was an absolute delight. I think that this is the best thing she has written, at least that I have read. It really does flow in a way that her other books, I think, kind of miss the mark for me a little bit. It really feels like she has a very clear direction and a very clear intention in this book. I think that learning to build and craft your own spells is such a coveted skill in witchcraft, but a lot of books kind of either gloss over it, or like the most advice they give is like to just experiment and to play around. And this book fills in all the gaps. It gives you so many building blocks to actually really like dive into the nitty-gritty. And it talks about like time, it talks about tools, it talks about correspondences, it talks about like alternatives and ways of substituting different things out if you don't have certain tools available for you. Highly recommend this, especially for beginners who are kind of moving from the beginning phase into a phase where they have a little bit more control over their craft and are looking to not just perform spells, but who actually want to start building their own spells and crafting their own spells. I think that this is an excellent, excellent place to start. And it's pretty, look. Sorry. Next up is a book you've probably seen me talking about so much this year because it's one of my absolute favorites from one of my favorite authors, and that is Queering Your Craft by Cassandra Snow. They also wrote Queering the Tarot. I love Queering the Tarot. So when Wiser sent me this, I was like, there's no way I'm not going to like this. And I was right. Cassandra Snow is just very, very, very quickly becoming one of my favorite authors in the occult world. They have such a clear intention while writing this book. And this book was such a breath of fresh air because you can just tell Snow's intention is purely to be a guiding light and a positive light and a constructive and productive light for the people in our community who need it. There's so much in here that helps us to challenge a lot of the traditional ways that we look at witchcraft, and a lot of it being like hyper feminine based, a lot of it being like hyper heteronormative, a lot of it being spiritually bypassing. I think if you are a member of the LGBTQIA community, that this would be a fantastic beginner book for you if you are looking to just really, really hard avoid talking about how like womanhood is related to your menstrual cycle, or talking about the balance of man and woman, and talking about like things in such a black and white way and such an old-fashioned, kind of really outdated, like Western way of thinking. I really do feel like this is just like the warmest, sweetest hug in book form. And if you are not a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, then I still think that you should read this book and consider other people's perspectives. Basically, I think that you should buy this book. Mandatory read. I think that it's helpful not only for you in your craft and expanding and becoming more worldly in yourself as an individual with your practice, but I think that it's also extremely necessary in becoming a more empathetic and understanding person and critically thinking outside of your own experience. That is what I'm trying to say. Cassandra Snow, freaking excellent. I can't wait. I know they have to write another book, and I'll be the first person to buy it because they go on my favorite shelf. Whew. Okay, next up is the Herbal Alchemist's, I'm just gonna read it because I can't speak. The Herbal Alchemist's Handbook, A Complete Guide to Magical Herbs and How to Use Them by Karen Harrison. There we go. Okay, good job, Brie. I was delighted when Wiser decided to send me a copy to read and review. This became one of my favorite books of the year, mostly just because it has like the same vibe as this bad boy right here, Scott Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs, which is a classic. If you don't have it, you should. And this book kind of has the same vibe going on, but with a really, really heavy focus on astrology and incorporating like the planets and astrological signs into your work instead. I highly recommend this. This seems like a must-have for anybody who is interested in like green witchcraft or herbal work or even kitchen witchcraft. There's so much in here and just so easily absorbable. You can read it easily from like front to back, but then there's also a really great potential to just like refer to it and flip to these really easy to find pages and chapters whenever you need to, like just on a whim. Love this book. Highly recommend, especially if you are on like a journey with using herbs in your crafts. This just seems like a no-brainer. I think you should have this book. If you don't like using or incorporating herbs into your work, or you use them very sparingly, I can't say that you need this. If you're gonna buy any and start with any basic like herb book, I would start with this bad boy right here, and then I would get this to accompany it. Next is another favorite from Wiser. I think Wiser had a really good year this year, and that one is Blackthorn's Botanical Brews by Amy Blackthorn. This was just a freaking delight to read. I am so in love with doing all of the recipes in this, taking like what she has to say about like different ingredients and experimenting and being inspired by this book. I think she just did a freaking phenomenal job. It's so dense, really. I mean, it's honestly very, very dense. There's so much in here, and there's such an even amount of like text and conversation and information, and also a really good chunk of like just straight recipes that she gives you. Goes over like actually what is magic, goes over tools, getting to know different ingredients, goes over like just like so many, like these are all like different recipes and ways of using different ingredients. Highly recommend this book. I love it so much. It's such a delight to read and go through. I have such a fun time creating things and trying out. A lot of the recipes are very tasty, and it's easy to substitute things too. It's great. This may actually be the last book on like my, like the last occult book on my favorite side. It's another book by Weiser, but I did purchase this book, and that is Astrology for Real Life by Theresa Reed. This is the best beginner book on astrology I've ever read. This book is like half information, half exercises, and it walks you through everything. So it's not even just like for beginners, like, because I would consider myself more on the intermediate level because I can like read a birth chart pretty well, but like for the longest time, like the houses really were throwing me for a loop, and the aspects. If you need to work on like just learning about the signs, it does that. You can just learn about the houses, and then you can learn about aspects, and then you can learn about like the nodes and asteroids, and you can learn about all of it. And it's just, this is so helpful. And the planets, that's what I was gonna say. You can learn about all the planets. She walks you through everything, and the best part about it is that this reread value is so high, because not only have I gone through this entire workbook with my birth chart, but I've also gone back through it and used other people's birth chart using the same exact exercises for practice. And it works so well. This is the only resource I've read that I like have constant access to that is just like, it really is helping certain things that don't work well with my brain. It is really helping them to stick. This one, for sure, one of my favorites of the year. Definitely like top 5. I read this constantly. Now that those are out of the way, I did want to jump into some books that aren't necessarily witchcraft related, but they were some of the best reads that I read this year. One of those was Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall. I wanted to talk about this book specifically because of the way feminism is kind of integrated so heavily into witchcraft, and especially like new age Western witchcraft, where it's kind of become synonymous with girl power. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how I think a lot of people in the spiritual community need to be a little bit more mindful and thoughtful and inclusive with their feminism than they are. Right now, a lot of the feminism that I see, that I see in witchcraft specifically and in this community is very white, wealthy, cis, straight, and it is very exclusive to those who don't fit that mold. It's exclusive of women of color, specifically Black women, and pushes Black women out of the picture and out of the narrative, and benefits off of the work that Black women perform. We can talk about how a lot of this like white female empowerment is often just inaccessible to homeless women, to women who come from abusive families, from women who grew up in poverty, to Indigenous women specifically. A lot of it is extremely exclusive to trans women, especially in the witchcraft community. There are so many TERFs in the witchcraft community. This book, I know that I said that we were done with my like occult reads. This one is mandatory too, because it is very applicable, not only to witchcraft, but like to the human experience. Just because that experience does not look like yours does not make it not a human experience. And a lot of you need to read this book. A lot of you need to read a lot of books, but this one, start with this one at the very least. Outside of that context, Mikki Kendall is simply a phenomenal writer. So careful and precise with her diction, and is so eloquent in the way that she speaks, so that everything she says has this raw, brutal tonality to it that like really forces you to look at something. There were so many moments of reading this book that I still was forced to accept that I am never going to know this experience. There is so much value in listening first and just not putting yourself in the center of a conversation, and things that I like already knew, you know, like logically, but just like you're sitting with discomfort. And I think a lot more people, especially white women, need to be sitting with their discomfort, allowing that discomfort to ride with you in the passenger seat. I don't know what else to say other than I can't imagine that this book was easy to write. And I'm just very grateful that she did. I think it's one of the best books of the year. And I think that it should be mandatory reading in high schools and colleges and for anybody watching my channel. So next on my list is Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram x Kendi. If we're gonna talk about mandatory reading, this is basically a history textbook. Because it's a history book. I don't want to be this like oblivious, ignorant asshole who's like, I had no idea racism was still such a problem. It's one thing to like know, and it's one thing to like comprehend that something is a problem and that something is happening. And it's another to piece it together from the beginning and start to connect these dots that you knew the dots were there, and then you start to see how things compound over 300, 400, 500 years. I think that if I could recommend any book for people to read out of this whole entire video, it would be this one. The amount of work it took to compile this, and the amount of like courage it probably had to take to openly dismantle so much of the history that has been taught incorrectly. I read this book by reading one chapter a day and sitting with that chapter and then reading another chapter the next day. And it took me a minute to get through it. It just goes through from beginning to now of the cruelties and awful realities that Black people have to face. Didn't come out of nowhere. And I think a lot of people need to come to terms with the fact that this is American history. And I don't want to get on a soapbox. I don't want to make it seem like I am better than anybody who hasn't read this book. At the end of the day, I mean, I just think everybody should read this, or at least all white people should read this. I don't think there's a lot more I can say about it without coming off as a pretentious twat. So yeah, that is that. So to conclude my favorites lists for this year are 2 fiction books. The first book is a part of my favorite series of all time. Yeah, I would say that this series could possibly exceed my love of The Lord of the Rings. Maybe it's more of a tie. Saying that felt really wrong. This book, I read the first book a while back, and then I think the second book was published last year, but I didn't read it till this year, and that is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. I'm literally just thinking about this series makes me tear up. Do you see this? Thinking about R.F. Kuang makes me want to cry. Like, do you hear my voice right now? She's the best fictional author who is like publishing work right now. I'm really sorry. I did not mean to get emotional about this right now. What? It has a female protagonist named Bryn who, I don't want to tell you anything about this book. I know BookTube knows this book. I know if you read fantasy and keep up with books, you know this book. I'm dying because the third book was published very recently and I don't have the money to buy it right now, and I'm dying because I need the Burning God in my life right now. But I did read this book this year, and It's devastating. That's all I'm gonna say, because obviously I'm not emotionally equipped to talk about this book in a productive way. So instead of crying and ruining my makeup, all I'm gonna tell you is that this is absolutely 100% one of the best books that I read of this year. It wasn't published this year, but one of the best books that I read this year, and I cannot wait to read the final installment of this series. It's just so stunning, so devastating, so brutally honest. The only other thing that I will say is that this is one of the most honest and true, real, authentic explorations of trauma that I have seen in fiction. It's incredible. The last fiction book, and the last book in general, that made my favorites list for 2020 is White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi. This book is not for everybody. Everything about this book is very like hauntingly gothic. It's very lovely. It's very like slow and clingy, and it's very disturbing in a way. It's very haunting, very atmospheric. Not a lot is always happening immediately. There's lots of POV switches. In my opinion, it's equal parts elegant and terrifying. And there's just something very like raw and nasty about this book. Something in my brain has only been touched a few times by authors like this. The Stranger by Albert Camus is one of those people. As I Lay Dying by Faulkner is one of those books that touches that part of my brain. And I don't know how to describe it, but it's this part of my brain that just kind of sinks into this dark place. And when I read books like this, it makes me feel like I'm home in a really weird way, and it makes me feel like I'm heard and understood. It does go over a lot of heavy topics in very, very subtle ways. So it's not heavy-handed, not like YA. It's not like, oh, here's the lesson that we learned throughout the character's journey. It's more so just loaded with thematic elements that flavor it the entire time in this really honest way. I mean, there's conversations to be had about like racism, mental health, eating disorders, LGBTQIA issues. It's a lot. You can tell just by looking at the Goodreads reviews that this is very hit or miss. And for me, it was very much a hit. I adore this book. I found this book to be hypnotizing. I read this book in a matter of days, whereas some people say they can't finish it. Totally up to you whether, I know this is not for everybody, but I just want to put it out into the universe that this is one of my favorite books. I adore this book. So that is it for my favorites of 2020. And now I'm going to tell you the 3 books, there are only 3, that I did not like this year. Another big warning, if you are an author, please click away. Don't get your feelings hurt, because I don't have a lot of constructive things to say about all of these. I'm just kidding. No, but really though, if you're an author, please don't watch this part of the video. Like, you shouldn't have watched the other part of the video, but like really you should not watch this part, because some of y'all are sensitive. First book on the list is The Age of Witches by Louisa Morgan. This is the only fiction book that I read that ended up on this list, which is surprising because as far as fiction is concerned, I am really easy to please. And this book is just so boring. I'm really sorry. And what's sad is that this book incorporates witchcraft in such a like real way. There's still like the fantasy part of witchcraft, which is great, but it also like incorporates herbs in a very honest and like authentic way. The part that irritated me the most about this book was the I'm not like other girls nonsense that I thought we had left behind, but apparently we're still doing it. It's the I don't care about ball gowns and fancy parties and society, and I just want to ride my horse and be a witch. Which, I mean, good for you, but like, I'm just so tired of reading that. And I just don't think that it was properly executed in this book. So I didn't care about the character. I didn't care about the protagonist. Also, along that note, the antagonist was literally just like the antagonist because she did care about those things and was like a bad mom for it or whatever. And I'm like, okay, like I've read this book so many times, and why did I just have to read it again? Except this one is so slow and so boring, and it's just like nothing ever happens. Like there's no clear like journey or arc or like character development. Nobody learns anything. There's just a very obvious bad guy, and like bad things happen to the protagonist, and then at the end all of a sudden they're in love. And yeah, that was my other biggest complaint, was the love story makes no sense. They literally go from like hating each other to I don't want to spoil it, but like it was not earned. The love story and like the transition from like enemies to lovers that needed to happen, which is normally a trope that I really like, because I love tension. It just didn't happen. You have to evolve. You have to have them do things together to fall in love. You can't just say they fell in love and then they did. Like, this is not a good book. I think I rated this like 1 or 2 stars on Goodreads. This is just not me. Do not recommend. So that was my one fiction book that I did not like this year. Next, I'm going to be getting into 2 witchcraft related books. And the first one is really disappointing because I asked for this for like Christmas or Yule last year, and I got it. And the book is The Book of Spells by Jamie Della, I think is her name. There are 2 reasons why I don't like this book. The first reason is that the spells, I do not like this format for spells. I personally think spells look best when written as a recipe with clear steps. Like, you know, you don't want a beginner doing things. This is literally a beginner book. And you don't want people doing things like out of order. You want to make sure you start with all the ingredients. You don't want to be like halfway through a spell and then realize you accidentally missed one of the ingredients or whatever. And then you have to like stop what you're doing to like go get it. So I just personally think that this is this is not helpful. It's just a paragraph. The other thing that I don't really like about it, I lied. There are 3 things that I don't like about this book. The other thing that I don't like about this book is that it seems kind of just like nonsensical, like placement, like order. It's just kind of random with what information is included when. Like we jump from deities, which I just personally don't feel like you should just be inviting people to work with all these deities. Like I get it, we wanna give you options. I just don't know if this was appropriate to put in here for a beginner book of this nature. Like this is like beginner book. And to put like God work in there without really even explicitly explaining how to do that, I find concerning. And then there's just like random correspondences. Like we literally jump from like the path and like different types of witchcraft, like Wicca and like whatever and Celtic, and to like holidays. And then we jump to gods. And I'm sorry if I'm being mean right now, but I just like don't understand how this book was put together and like what the thought process was. It's just like shoving every possible topic somebody could possibly be interested in witchcraft and just cramming all of those topics into 1 page each. At least, you know, like I just like why I don't know, maybe I'm being really nitpicky, but like while I was reading it, I just was like, why are we jumping around so much? Like, you haven't gone over anything. You're just saying words that I could Wikipedia. Like, it didn't teach anything. I would never give this to a beginner. This is like, here's an idea of what witchcraft might be after you learn it from somebody else. And I just like, it's a shame because like, I'm a sucker for a good cover, and like this is stunning. And the last thing, and probably actually the biggest thing that irritates me about this book, is she cannot shut up about the rule of 3. And let me give you an example of what I mean. Like, I swear she brings it up every 5 seconds, and it just really irritates me. I think it's on the first page. So it's on, okay, so we have the introduction, right? And then this is the first section. It's on the first page. Let me read it to you. It is a personal choice whether you identify as a witch or a Wiccan. Wicca is an earth-based lifestyle and hierarchical religion. Being a witch is also an earth-based lifestyle. Not necessarily. I know that that's an unpopular opinion, but like to definitively say witchcraft is earth-based is not necessarily true. That's not my point. But she goes on to say, both paths follow and celebrate the rhythm of nature and abide by the Wiccan reed. Do what thou will as long as you harm none, and the threefold law, whatever you do comes back to you 3 times 3 times 3. I'm not going to explain why that pisses me off. Basically, long story short, witches usually do not follow the Wiccan reed because the Wiccan reed is for Wiccans, not non-Wiccan witches. That makes no sense. That's so annoying that that's included in this book. In literally the first paragraph, I just spit everywhere. I'm so mad. If not even just for that, she brings it up every chapter. Like literally every other topic, she's like warning you to make sure you're doing like no harm. Shut the up about the threefold law. How dare you write a book and say something about witchcraft that's not true? And like, I said I wasn't going to talk about it, and this is why. I'm not going to say anything more about it. Basically, this book is garbage. I'm sorry. This book is not my favorite. I don't care for this book. I do not like this book. That's that. I'm really sorry if I was being really harsh. I think it's a lot of witches' pet peeves when somebody says something along the lines of, oh, witches follow the threefold law, and we're like, no, we don't. Most of us don't. I don't know anybody in real life who follows the threefold law. So like, pipe down, okay? And so the last book I'm going to be talking about today is kind of a scary one. I am aware that this person is a very popular online content creator who has lots and lots and lots of followers. And I want to be very, very clear that this criticism and the critique of this book is not personal. It has nothing to do with the author herself. I am strictly coming at it from a person reading a book that they thought they were going to really enjoy, and it turns out I really hated it. So my camera cut out as I was about to talk about the last book on my list. That's probably a good thing because since then I've been able to kind of chill and calm down and not go on a full like rant like I did with the last book. Basically, like I said, the review of this book isn't personal. I'm just, I expected to really like it, and I was really disappointed by it, and I'll tell you why. I feel a little bit better about my review of this book now because I've actually talked to people who feel the same way, so I know I'm not alone at least. And like I said at the beginning of the video, if you do like this book, that's fine. And unfortunately, the last book on my least favorites of 2020 list is Year of the Witch by Temperance Alden. Like I said, I know Temperance has a really big following. I know a lot of people love her content. I've never really had an issue with her online content. I'm pretty indifferent towards it. I'm definitely not the audience for it, so it makes sense that it wouldn't necessarily resonate with me. Year of the Witch, however, I have a few different problems with. I guess my biggest issue, the number one issue with this book, is that it doesn't do what it says it does. So when this book was advertised, for months, there was a lot of hype leading up to it. Basically, my understanding of this book was that it was going to discuss ways to reframe the traditional Wheel of the Year in ways that would be just more applicable for people depending on their location, for the climate that you're in. It was just going to kind of reframe the Wheel of the Year so that it could just be more easily celebrated. So, I was really looking forward to seeing a lot of modern innovation and a lot of originality in this book. I was really excited to see Alden be really creative with the ideas and exercises and different tools she was going to give, and it just doesn't do that. It doesn't reframe anything. I feel like half of the book is an introduction, and then the second half of the book is just the same basic information about the holidays that I could Wikipedia or that I could get, it's a really watered down version of these guys. I know a lot of really big influencers are hyping this book up. I just do not agree that this book does anything innovative or brings any new conversation to the table. It's just the same old. That's my biggest issue with it, I think. One of the other really big issues that I had with this book is that I just do not think that this book is well written. In fact, I think that it's very poorly written. Alden is just not a good writer. This book is like difficult to read, not because the content is dense or because it's like hard to absorb or because it's like complicated or complex in nature, but simply because the way that it's written, I was just constantly having to reread paragraphs. I was constantly checking to make sure I hadn't accidentally skipped a page. I felt like there were so many sections where she was just kind of beating around the bush and never really had the connective tissue required to like actually get into the nitty gritty of her point. There were a lot of sections that felt like she was just repeating the same sentence in a different way over and over again. This felt more like a really, really long-winded blog article than it did like a professionally published book. I just didn't have a good time reading this. It didn't flow well. It was almost too personal. Her tone was almost angry throughout the book. There were so many little like spicy tidbits that just felt really petty, and in doing so, a lot of these like spicy takes that kind of were scattered throughout this book ended up contradicting each other in a not in like a nuanced way, but they just like contradicted each other because I felt like she was just saying things because they sounded good and saying things because like on the surface level she agreed with them, but didn't realize it was going to completely contradict something that she said like 2 pages later. And for that, it just felt really disjointed. It felt really ingenuine. It felt insincere. And it just felt like this was like an outlet for her to air her grievances with certain people in the community. It just felt awkward to read. Like, I felt uncomfortable. Like, who are you mad at? It was just so vague in general. I don't know if I'm doing a really good job of explaining it. I have a whole review on Goodreads that kind of, I think I was able to relay my thoughts a little bit better about this book. And then the other thing, there was a little bit of anti-science nonsense in this book, and I'm not sure if I just like read it wrong, because that really genuinely shocked me. There's a section on climate change in this book that I reread probably like 10 times trying to figure out if I was reading the paragraph wrong. Because in the section, she essentially says that climate change is normal and natural and that humans can't possibly be affecting it and that we shouldn't worry about it. And I really hope that I read that wrong, because that was just so concerning and disappointing to read in this book. Because what? There's like something about like, oh, a handful of scientists believe this, but then we never talk about the big handful of scientists that do believe climate change is a man-made issue we need to be addressing. So I just was like really, so many sections feel unfinished, so many sections feel really half-assed. I don't know, maybe writing just isn't her forte. Outside of that, there was just a lot of like content, like statements that I just content-wise I disagreed with. Like, I can't get it out of my head. I always come back to this one thing. I just remember reading this section on the elements, and in it she states something about water being the most important element because you can't live without it. I get it, but like, the point of the elements is that they balance each other out and none of them are more important than the other. Just from a standard basic Witchcraft 101 point of view, to state that one is more important than the other just feels really juvenile. I didn't know if it was a joke, but if it was a bad one in a beginner book. And 2, you can't live without all of the elements. I could probably go through this book and like pick some nitpick in every single section, because as I read this book, I just grew more and more irritated with the content that was inside of it. I hope I didn't miss anything. There's a lot about this book that I just didn't care for. Oh, the shepherd thing. There's a lot of like Christian references in here that I find strange, considering she says she's not Christian. I don't know. This book just doesn't do it for me. I really highly, highly, highly recommend that you don't buy this book. There are so many other beginner books out there that can give you so much more to work with and aren't full of this like kind of like nasty, petty energy that I got while reading this book, which is sad to say. I'm really sorry, but that's just what I picked up on while reading this. That being said, if she's your fave and you trust her and you like her online content, I imagine you'll also like this book. I don't know, but as somebody who's kind of a third party who is pretty neutral with her, I could recommend a million other beginner books that provide a lot more valuable insight and a lot more good stepping stones than this one does. This one just so shallow and just not worth the hype and not worth the promise that it's just not worth your money. I'm really sorry. Again, I'm really sorry. I feel really conflicted about not liking this book because I know, like, I feel like I'm supposed to like it, but it just doesn't do it for me, and I'm really sorry if that upsets you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that I didn't upset you too much with my favorites and least favorites of 2020. I would love to know what your favorites and least favorite books of 2020 were, especially if any of my favorites are on your least favorite or vice versa, if any of my least favorites are on your favorites. I would love to know and talk about it in the comments down below. I'm always up to hear about other people's points of view when reading books and consuming content like this. I think it's really important for us all to just kind of talk about and keep in mind that different people are looking for different things when it comes to content consumption. I will be doing a What I Read in January video that will go live in the first week of next month, I believe, and I will be doing these every month, so that way I don't have to do an entire year and hopefully not have a 40-minute video at the end of the year next year. So please let me know down below what you're reading and what you would like me to read and what you would like to see me review. It can be either occult, or it can be fiction, it can be manga, it can be nonfiction, it can be anything. So just let me know what you'd like to see me review, and I will do my best to do that. If you like this video, feel free to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe if you want to see more content, and of course there's the little bell if you want to be notified when I upload, and which will be every Monday except this past Monday because obviously I didn't realize half my video was missing until I went to edit it and got to the end of the video and had to find time to reshoot the ending. But aside from last week, I will be uploading every Monday, hopefully. And yeah. I obviously still don't know how to end my videos, so I hope you have a great day. And I hope you enjoy the book you're reading. And bye!